Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, John Meuret looks at the corn and soybean export markets. Amit Jhala describes the EPA's XtendiMax registration for use in soybeans. Martha Shulski previews potential weather conditions in December, and Aaron Berger talks about costs for cow-calf producers. John Meuret from Meuret Grain Company is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. The U.S. harvest is nearing the end. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's latest progress report shows farmers have picked 93% of this season's corn and 97% of this year's soybeans. As the agency's November crop report showed, production in 2016 will push the country's total corn supply to a new record at more than 17 billion bushels. The ending stock's estimate of 2.4 billion bushels is the most since the late 80s. There has been solid demand from the export market. Final numbers from September show corn shipments were 89% higher than the previous year, and the current export forecast for 16-17 would be the highest since 07-08. We talked with John Wednesday afternoon near Monroe, Nebraska, about the export market, the beginning of the South American growing season, and harvest results from his area of northeast Nebraska.
Real good, Jeff. This is probably one of the first years we've consistently seen better corn. So you used to hear the 240s, 250s, and it was one a year, two a year. Now you can find a dozen of those. So overall, really, really good.
And beans?
Beans were good as well. It was the biggest bean crop we've never felt, Jeff. It stayed wet enough in the outside weather that you never really took the bean crop off quickly. So over a 30-day period, though, the yields were excellent. And they stayed good.
Let's take a final look at those numbers from the USDA last week. When they're finalized in January, do you expect any major changes?
I really don't. They took the corn yield up, which surprised everybody, but the late corn was better, and I think the late corn was better everywhere. So seeing that and then seeing what the USDA came out with, I don't have any problem with the 175. Probably not a lot of revision from that, plus or minus a half bushel or a bushel, Jeff, but not a huge item. And beans, I don't argue with that either. That is a record yield. When we talked about 50 bushel, we didn't think it was possible. So to finally come with something like that is surprising, but again, I can't disagree with it. So,
can you describe just how strong the export market has been for both American corn and beans?
The beans, first and foremost, have been fabulous. It's been fast, but the pipeline was empty. We've built capacity in the last 10 years to get beans exported. So both the Gulf and the Pacific Northwest have been very aggressive getting boats loaded and shipped. And we're starting to feel a little bit of a slowdown there, which is normal, but things have flowed really, really well, Jeff. So yes, it's big, but I think our window is also shortened. So instead of exporting beans till February or March, we might slow the process down come January and early February. So, and corn's going to pick up some of the slack there, and it needs to. If we export 2 billion bushel of beans and 2 billion bushel of corns, we need to get moving on it. So
who else is in the game? Is it South America mainly?
South America is in there, and so they planted their bean crop a little earlier, which means they're going to sell their bean crop and harvest a little earlier. So if they have normal weather and normal harvest, they will be back in the market in late January, which is a month earlier than normal.
Is the strengthening dollar a concern?
I think short term, yes. Long term, no. Short term, it can have a little bit of an impact. China can now sit back a little bit and buy beans a little slower. They've got a little more inventory floating that they're comfortable. Soybeans are in a carry for the first time in a long time, so they can be somewhat patient when they do that.
We've talked about this before, but how much flexibility does China have when it comes to buying beans?
I think they've got a lot of flexibility. but they've also got to buy a lot of soybeans. So when they can take a month off from buying, when they come back in on day 32, they need to buy a lot more. So you can somewhat anticipate it, but it's large and it's consistent. So
you mentioned South America. Give me an update on what the beginning of that growing season looks like.
You know, I would say excellent so far. There's a couple dry pockets in northern Brazil they're worried about, but there is some rain patterns this week through early next week that look like it's going to soak them up pretty good. So above average today. I think they planted a little earlier than they should have, and so they're on a really good start, and they need one. They missed last year, and so did Argentina.
Expectations of a big crop?
I don't expect why it'd be anything but a big crop today, Jeff. I think if they get it in the ground and if the weather cooperates, they should be able to harvest and haul a big crop to town. So,
how has basis moved here as harvest closes out in the area?
We see corn basis starting to perk up late here in the last week. We see corn basis up a nickel to a dime in some cases. Soybean bases are up maybe 20 cents in the last 10 days. So you can feel that it's the end of the crop and we're starting to firm things up. And that's very normal. But Jeff, it started weaker than normal, so it should snap back a little faster than normal.
What was the mentality of the grower here closing out what's going to be a record crop in both corn and soybeans? Are they aggressive to sell? Were they aggressive to sell?
Well, I think he was aggressive early on soybeans. He was surprised they hung around $9 cash, and then he got quiet. And I think he got quiet for a couple reasons. He was surprised that the prices stayed as high, and they thought maybe he's the only guy getting the big yields. And then the second one is he's been able to do field work. We're standing outside in November without a jacket on, and so I think until the farmer gets pushed into his desk, he's not particularly engaged in marketing, and nothing's scaring him today. We're 75 cents higher than a year ago on beans, and a bigger crop and a bigger carryout expected. So, and corn's a head scratcher as well, Jeff.
Finally, to close out with, your price forecast. Let's start in corn.
I think corn's going to work 30, 40 cents lower than here in the next 60 days.
That's pretty depressing.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, no, we tried to rally in October. We did rally in October. We set the fall insurance price, and then I just think we're going to fall back to the lows here. Unless we have a problem overseas, we're going to fall back to the lows.
You anticipate then that the farmer's just going to sit and wait until the first of the year?
I think he'll wait as long as he can. I suspicion he needs a little more cash before year end. But yeah, he's going to sit and wait as long as he could or can, and then we'll see where it goes.
All right, second half of the game, pick me up in soybeans.
Soybeans short term, I'm negative. Long term, I'm friendly, Jeff. So we'll make you feel a little better, but we should see the pressure of no problems in South America, an overwhelming cash supply in the U.S., and I think until something changes, we'll be under some pressure.
Why long-term positive then?
Well, China's demand, we talked about it earlier, but they've got an overwhelming demand. If they take 85 or 90 million metric tons, that is a massive amount of soybeans. And so until that slows or we do something to mess with foreign policy, it's going to stay in there strong. We'll chew up every bean we grow.
Next week, University of Missouri Extension economist Ron Plain will join us to look at hog markets. Soybean growers in 34 states, including Nebraska, will be able to use a formulation of dicamba to help control weeds in 2017. The Environmental Protection Agency has given 2-year approval to Monsanto's XtendiMax with VaporGrip technology for use in genetically engineered soybeans and cotton. The EPA's registration puts several restrictions on using the product, including banning aerial applications and not allowing its use when winds exceed 15 miles per hour. University of Nebraska-Lincoln researchers have been testing this technology in the Roundup Ready to Extend system over the last 4 years. On Monday, we talked with Nebraska Extension weed management specialist Amit Jhala and began by asking about the XtendiMax product.
XtendiMax is a new formulation of dicamba based on DGA salt, and it is prepared with VaporGrip technology, which is a very new technology to make this new formulation very less volatile compared with any other commercially available dicamba based products.
So what will be the use of this technology for Nebraska growers?
So far in Nebraska, we have confirmed 6 broadleaf weeds resistant to glyphosate, including common water hemp, common ragweed, giant ragweed, myrtle, kochia, and palmer amaranth, and all are broadleaf weeds that cannot be controlled by glyphosate applied alone. So this new technology will be useful, especially when we will have an opportunity to apply this post-emergence application of XtendiMax on top of that. So it will provide us one more herbicide tool to control overall this glyphosate resistant weeds.
Give me the background of the Roundup Ready to Extend soybeans.
So Roundup Ready to Extend soybean is a specifically genetically engineered soybean variety tolerant to dicamba, which is a broadleaf phenoxy group herbicide. So basically this research started at UNL, and then it was given to Monsanto for commercial application.
Tell me more about your research, what you found using this technology.
We have started working with Roundup Ready to Extend soybean and this XtendiMax herbicide back before 4 years. We have tested this for weed control and crop safety, and so far we have seen very good results as far as weed control program is concerned, and we have seen excellent results when we have applied some very strong pre-emergence herbicide, and when it was followed by XtendiMax, which is a dicamba new dicamba formulation. Plus we also have tested Roundup Extend, which will be a glyphosate plus dicamba formulation, but it is not approved by EPA yet.
There were numerous concerns with dicamba in states to the south this year and drift damage. Can you tell me why dicamba is so volatile and how XtendiMax is different from that?
This year there were a number of issues specifically in the south because Roundup Ready to Extend soybean was available in the market, but the dicamba formulations like XtendiMax was not available in the market. So growers, they purchased this Roundup Ready to Extend soybean and they applied those traditionally commercially available dicamba based formulations on top of that soybean. So which is not legal, and those dicamba formulations are very volatile compared with this new formulation. So that's why there were a number of issues with drift as well as volatility from the site of application.
Did you find anything in your research that growers need to be aware of when applying with certain wind speeds or nozzle types?
Yes, there will be number of recommendations developed by industry, and it has to be applied with certain wind speed and certain nozzle type, and overall target here is just to avoid any off-target movement, because it is still a phenoxy based herbicide and it can create a lot of injury if it will not be applied with recommended practices.
The EPA's recommendation of 15 miles per hour, that seems like a lot. Is that acceptable?
So far we have tested only when wind speed is less than 10 miles per hour. So it will be interesting to see how it goes in a state like Nebraska, which is relatively more windy in compared to other states. So yeah, I can't say exactly, but so far our research was based on when we applied less than 10 miles per hour.
How widely adopted will this be in 2017?
It will be hugely adopted. Industry is claiming like they already have sold Roundup Ready to Extend that can be on 15 million acres, which will be a lot.
Tell me about the problems Nebraska at least faces with dicamba resistant weeds, which, you know, those problems still exist in this system now.
Yeah, so far we have only one weed right now resistant to dicamba is kochia, which is particularly more in western part of the state. So therefore this new technology, we have to use it very carefully, and growers should not rely only on XtendiMax for their weed control program, because we already have kochia resistant to dicamba, and if we will keep using XtendiMax just like we used glyphosate based products in glyphosate tolerant crops, then at some point we end up with having some more broadleaf weed species that will be resistant to dicamba. So we always recommend to use some other herbicides and to include herbicide program that should be based on multiple effective modes of action.
Amit recently authored a Crop Watch article on this topic. You can find that through a link on the Market Journal website. The Climate Prediction Center at the National Weather Service projects December could be warmer than usual in Nebraska with above or below normal precipitation. The one-month outlook for December was released this week. Parts of Nebraska could use moisture to close out the month. The latest U.S. drought monitor shows nearly 11% of the state in D1 to D4 conditions, the most since May 2015. The majority of that 11% is categorized in moderate or D1 drought. Thursday morning, we talked with Nebraska Extension State Climatologist Shulski to discuss the weather outlook. We started by asking about changes in this week's drought monitor.
So in the drought monitor this week, we did have an increase of drought conditions, and those were kind of creeping up from Kansas and Colorado. We've seen an increase in drought conditions around Nebraska and within Nebraska, and particularly in the Southwest and the Panhandle.
Can you describe which area of the state specifically is, I guess, worst off?
Right, so we're still seeing a small hot spot centered right around Kearney County, and that's been in the drought monitor for about 3 months now. And then in the Southwest and in the Panhandle, we're seeing D1 start to creep in that area.
Let's look at what we could expect for December and then past December. So the CPC's outlook for December shows what?
So it shows an increased chance for warmer than normal temperatures for Nebraska and for pretty large area south of Nebraska and west of Nebraska. In terms of precipitation, there's equal chances locally. There's increased chance for wetness kind of northwest of Nebraska and in the Great Lakes area. So that's what the outlooks are for December in particular.
What about the seasonal outlooks?
So for the seasonal outlooks, it's interesting. Nebraska kind of lies in this zone in between an increased chance for cooler and wetter to our north and warmer and drier to our south. And that's a pretty typical La Nina signature, which is what we're currently in right now, which is kind of a weak La Nina area. And so one thing that we'll really be keeping an eye on is the Arctic oscillation. And so that determines kind of how strong the circulation is around the Arctic. And when it weakens, we have an increased chance for kind of cold air outbreaks. And so we'll be watching to keep an eye on what's that Arctic oscillation doing. Do we have increased chance for these cold air outbreaks and snow conditions?
Can you go a little bit further on where we are in La Nina, just how strong it is and why that matters?
Yes, so we are technically in a weak La Nina pattern, and so that's a cooling of the waters in the equatorial Pacific. So it's a relatively small cold pool that's there right now with warmer waters surrounding it. Circulation conditions in the atmosphere are indicating also a weak La Nina, and the predictions going into the future are for it's a high likelihood to transition to neutral conditions by the end of winter. So we'll be keeping an eye to see does that play out.
November has felt warmer than normal. Is that accurate?
That is true. If you look at the data, we're actually a pretty far departure from normal in the 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit range. And in fact, if you go back and look at the beginning of the year, so January to date, we've been quite warm, and that's true for the U.S. as a whole and globally. These temperatures just kind of keep marching up.
In a few minutes, Al will give his weather forecast for Nebraska. It features the potential for snow over the next week. The USDA expects this year cash income from the sale of cattle and calves in the U.S. will drop $8.6 billion. That's an 11% slide from 2015 and about 15% below 2014. In November and December, Nebraska Extension will be holding meetings for cow-calf producers on calculating unit cost of production. Aaron Berger is part of the group conducting those meetings. He joined us earlier this week from the Panhandle Research and Extension Center in Scottsbluff to talk more about how the overall economic environment is different for those farmers and ranchers compared to recent years.
So it's significantly different than it was a year ago. You know, last year at this time we were maybe looking at calf prices around $2.20 a pound. Now we're in anywhere $1.20 to $1.50 per pound. So really a drastic change. Even more of a drastic change from what it was of fall of 2014 when we saw record high prices, where we saw a lot of 5-weight calves pushing almost $3 a pound. So we're in many cases grossing 40% of what we would have 2 years ago. And that kind of fluctuation from a gross dollars from a cow-calf standpoint really can provide some challenges.
Yeah, can you give me an idea of kind of the stair-step downward we're tracking here in terms of margins for cow-calf producers?
Yeah, so as I put together numbers kind of for a typical central Nebraska ranch, when we value things at market prices, we're valuing feed at market price, labor at equivalent what would it be if we went and hired someone to replace us. We're using depreciation, interest on capital investment. We're right around $1,000 per cow. If we look at then at 85% calf crop weaned per cow exposed, you know, that pushes up around $1,175 for a weaned calf. So in light of 2014, we were making some pretty good money at that situation. 2015, still a little profitable. 2016, that's a money loser. And so that provides some challenges for us from a cow-calf standpoint.
So are there areas, Aaron, where producers can look at specific costs or cost areas to think about reducing in the year or years ahead?
So as we look at the cow-calf enterprise, really the three big costs that jump out are first feed, that's both grazed feed and harvested feed. The second would be tied to overheads related to labor and equipment. The third is really around cow depreciation, looking at the value of the cow as she enters the herd and the value when she leaves the herd. Really taking a hard look at those three is where there's some leverage points, or at least the potential for leverage points. Looking at ways we might at least manage costs there, reduce costs where we can, look at opportunities to try to squeeze more out of what we put into that system, or look at ways to take something away from the system and not have it drastically affect our production.
Aaron, in light of the current economic situation, what do you think the outlook is for pasture rents, at least in that area of the state?
So as we look at Nebraska, we have some of the highest pasture rents in terms of cost per pair per month of anywhere in the United States. One of the things I think is going to challenge pasture rent under current situations is market of cattle. I think there's going to be less demand for pasture, but that having been said, we have to go back to the early 80s before we see a time when we've actually seen pasture rents decrease, and there always seems to be good demand for pasture. I guess the other thing I think that may challenge pasture rents a little bit is just the cost of harvested feed. When we look at grain prices, hay prices, the price of distillers' grains, in many ways, we can look at a ration for a cow that's very competitive for what we can take her to pasture for, and so that may put some pressure on pasture as well. But it'll be interesting to see as we go into the 2017 grazing season what pasture rental rates do. I do think they're certainly going to be under pressure.
We've talked before about determining costs of production on your operation. Can you reiterate why you feel it's important, how difficult or simple it can be to determine your cost of production?
Well, knowing your cost of production just really gives you a place to know where you're at. The real power in it, though, is looking forward and saying, based on where we're at in terms of our cost of production, what can we do management-wise going forward that can either reduce those costs or help us find ways to add value? So when we know our cost, it really gives us a lot of power from a futuristic standpoint, looking forward, thinking about management decisions. It also gives us some confidence in making marketing decisions and thinking about what we might do, looking at options for price protection. You know, I think it also just gives us confidence in looking at maybe where are some things we could change to try to reduce our cost of production, and especially in light of current scenario where we can maybe make ourselves be more profitable if we made those changes. So that's really the value cost of production. When we do a unit cost of production, we need to have accurate financial and production numbers. We're really melding those two together to get a handle on where we're at. It doesn't take really detailed information, but it does take complete and thorough information. And so we're going to talk about that at a series of workshops that we have coming up, looking at actual cost of production numbers from a case study ranch and working through how can we get to cost of production for a cow-calf enterprise.
Those workshops Aaron mentioned will be held in Valentine, at the Goodmanson Sandhills Lab, and in Scottsbluff. You can find more details, including registration information, through a link on the Market Journal homepage. The November Nebraska Farmer says for some people, friendly competition might involve a pickup game of backyard football or one-on-one basketball. For Nebraska Extension educator Gary Stone and other conservationists, though, it's a match to see who can best control cheatgrass on a quarter-acre of land. Based in Scottsbluff, Stone and his team are competing against teams from the University of Wyoming Extension, the Wyoming Reclamation and Restoration Center, Wyoming Weed and Pest Control, and others as part of the University of Wyoming Cheatgrass Challenge. You can read more about the competition and the methods teams are using in the November Nebraska Farmer. Now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Of course, the big news during this past 7 days has been, one, the warmth that we've seen, the excessive warmth we've seen in the early part of the week, and of course the subsequent snowstorm that rolled out into the Central Plains on the Thursday time frame, and then of course kind of exited our region Friday. Brought some significant snowfall to portions of northwest, north central Nebraska, lesser amounts as you move down towards central Nebraska and west central Nebraska. And unfortunately, we did see some areas receive some beneficial moisture, but other areas kind of disappointing. And in particular, the southwestern corner of the state, where we've seen an up-ramping of the drought from abnormally dry conditions to now seeing some moderate drought conditions across the southwestern half of that district and extreme southern and southeastern panhandle. Some of these areas we'll have to look at things and see what the impacts of the snowfall was, but generally when we see an event like this, it takes one or two of them before we feel comfortable enough to start easing up conditions. That being said, there are some signs that we've got some active weather ahead of us, so let's get right away to the maps. And as we go to the maps, the first thing I'll draw your attention to is we got this big trough in the western United States and a ridge over the center part of the country. And here's our exiting trough that brought the winter storm activity to us. We're going to see this trough start to move its way toward our region, but in the meantime, we're going to see ridging pattern develop as we go through Sunday, and that'll keep the weather at bay. But here comes that low starting to move out, injecting energy out into the Central Plains, and some of that may skirt southeastern Nebraska, particularly as we get into the Tuesday time frame, and that moves off to our east. We get a high pressure system building in. Looks like fairly decent weather as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. So Thanksgiving looks to be fairly nice, and then this trough starts to move through. And this is the one that scares me a little bit as it starts to organize to the south of us, starts to pull up through Iowa. We start to see precipitation break out with the cold air on the backside. So extreme eastern Nebraska may be in line for some light precipitation, but if this thing backs up a little bit toward to the west, we may see some inclement weather, particularly snowfall in portions of eastern Nebraska. Right now, I'd say that's a very low probability. In terms of the precipitation, let's watch how this system starts to move this precipitation. Very aggressive precipitation pattern in the western United States. As we go into Sunday, it starts to move on shore, and then we start to see some organization of that precipitation from the second system that is expected to skirt to the south of us. Right now, we're showing 1 to 2 inches in southeast Nebraska. This is way overdone. This system moves out as we get into Wednesday and clears the system up here in the Central Plains. So we're going to look at nice weather for a couple days, and then on Friday the next system ejects out, and we can see that it starts to take shape over Iowa. We can see a mixture of rain and snowfall, and then that passes out toward the northeast next weekend. If this backs up, we'll see this heavier precipitation in our region. Now for the 8 to 14 day forecast, very aggressive by CPC in terms of above normal temperatures. I think this is way overplayed. With this system that just came out with the snowfall over the northern plains and subsequent systems bringing colder air in, this is way overplayed. I would believe that the warmer temperatures above normal will be well to our south, and we'll be closer to normal to slightly below normal in the northern portion of this forecast area. The one thing I do agree on is that this precipitation ejecting out of this trough in the western United States looks like it's going to bring more moisture to us as we go into next weekend, the following weekend. In fact, the one thing I'm paying attention to right now is it looks like one system after another rolling into our region, and a very strong storm looks like it may impact the Central Plains right after the Thanksgiving Day weekend. So keep that in store as we look forward in time.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, the EPA's registration of XtendiMax, the weather outlook for December, and costs for cow-calf producers. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. The Market Journal Roadshow takes place November 28th through December 2nd at 4 locations in Nebraska. You can find more information at mj.unl.edu/roadshow. Next week, Ron Plain will be our hog market analyst, and Iowa State's Dermot Hayes will look at the future for U.S. ag trade. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.